All right, this seems like how everyone displays their card. This looks like a good spot. I'm gonna put it right here. Wait, what's that sound? All right, we'll try somewhere else. That'll just by the window. Maybe I'll just put it on top of my display case right here. Wait, what's that sound? I think this is one of those things every collector runs into where you get some of these cards that you really treasure and then you want to display them, right? Because they're really cool and they're like the big parts of your collection. Because at the end of the day, what's the point of putting so much time, so much effort, so much of yourself into collecting some of these things if you're just going to lock it away in a vault or toss it into a box in a dark closet somewhere and just never see it again? Especially if you have somewhere to display your stuff in your room or in your place and you want to be able to show it to your friends because you're proud of your hobby. And when they come over, you want to be able to show them, like, hey, you know what? This is the stuff that I collect, and these are like my favorite parts of my collection. But there's one thing that I think people don't think about when it comes to displaying their cards in their homes. And that one thing is the sun and how sunlight or light in general could actually damage your cards. I actually have an example here of what sun damage could look like, and I actually never displayed these cards in the sunlight, but it's pretty similar to the type of fading that you'll see when it comes to sun damage. So I'm going to show you two cards that are exactly the same. I have a Celtic Guardian here and another Celtic Guardian, where you see the Celtic Guardian on the left has a little bit more vibrant colors. And then the Celtic Guardian on the right is a little bit more faded, right? And I'm going to do the same comparison with the Dark Magician. The Dark Magician is actually a little bit more extreme, where it's actually very, very faded, where you see like he's no longer even purple anymore, and the colors are just like very, very washed out. And then here, when you look online, you'll actually see some even more extreme examples of sun damage where the color is just like completely washed out. And when we look at the world around us, even outside of trading cards or collectibles, you'll see even in the world around us where you walk into a store or you walk by a store and they have something in the display window outside, and you'll see anything that has a sign that was supposed to be white before, but over the years, since they left it there for a really long time, the signs start yellowing, the colors start fading, and you'll see this not even in stores, like maybe on cars or just anything outside if you just look around. And what causes this, without getting too sciencey or too in-depth, is pretty much UV light, which typically comes from the sun. And what it does is it actually breaks down a lot of like these chemical bonds, which causes the colors to fade. And I did that skit at the beginning because if you think that just because you move your items away from sunlight and you display it in your display case with whatever light is in your display case or near it, and it's safe, it's not. Because actually, UV light could actually come from a lot of types of light bulbs, especially fluorescent light bulbs, where over time, depending on how close it is to it, how often is exposed to it, how bright it is as well too, could degrade your items over time as well. There's no 100% way to have absolutely no type of UV radiation, but when it comes to lighting, typically you want to stay from fluorescent lighting, and fluorescent lighting is typically those stereotypical light bulbs that you see when people draw, and you probably want to use LED lights, which are not as strong in general. They do emit a certain amount of radiation, but not as much as you would in like those really cheap light bulbs that you get in like a 24 pack or something. But when it comes to displaying your cards, I think one common misconception is a lot of people see things like UV protected or UV proof or something like that on one touch cases or maybe display cases. You have to be careful that just because it has a certain amount of UV protection, it doesn't mean that if you leave these things out in the sun, it won't get damaged. Because you have to think about it in a sense where it's sort of like sunblock and sunscreen, where over time these things degrade and you're going to need to reapply it. There's like a science and it has a lot to do with these chemical bonds, right? So just because something says is UV proof or UV resistant doesn't mean that you're 100% safe and you could just leave it out there and not worry about it. So then you'll ask, like, so what's the best way to display it without any kind of damage, right? The best suggestion I could probably have is, one, keep it out of sunlight. Make sure that if you have a window nearby, if it doesn't have any sort of, like, UV protection or anything like that, or shades in general, you don't want it to be in a spot where the sun is beaming down on it the whole time. And when it comes to indoor lighting, as I mentioned before, you typically want LED lights that are not as strong, especially you don't want your cars near lights that are on the whole time and beaming down directly on it. If you have something like kind of covering it or whatever it is, or it has some sort of shade nearby where it's not beaming down on it directly, that's probably the best. And one other thing that could affect your cards in general, if you're displaying them or if you're storing them in your house, is humidity. And humidity is a very, very important thing. And what it is pretty much the level of moisture in the air. So let's just say if you live in some place a little bit more south rather than north, your weather is a little bit more warm, right? So it feels like a lot more like wet in the environment. Whereas like if you live somewhere more north, it feels very dry. And this could affect your cards because especially if you're not turning on things like your air conditioning, your heating, and the temperature could vary and swing a lot. So you could deal with like cards warping pretty much, where you'll see it common a lot with a lot of foil cards where they're full foils. Over time, you're going to notice these cards starting to bend, and that's because of the humidity in the air. So there's a lot of things that you have to consider when you're storing your cards as well as displaying your cards. And most of it has to do with the actual environment and pretty much natural elements like the sun, water are the major ones. And you want to be very, very careful and consider these things when you're displaying and storing your cards. So in general, I just wanted to put this message out there because I know a lot of people believe when it says like, oh, a case is UV proof, or this display case is UV proof, or it protects us against a certain amount of sunlight. Before you just actually believe them and just shove it on your wall where the sun beams down on it, remember that a lot of these times, these things take years for you to see the damage, sometimes like 20, 30 years, or in some cases, depending on how strong the sunlight is in your place, it could be beaming down on it for even like weeks and you'll start to see the color deteriorating. And like everything else I talk about in my videos, I really don't like giving advice to people, and I don't like when people give advice to other people without considering all these other factors. Because at the end of the day, you know what? It's your stuff, and people just say whatever because at like 30 years later, if your cards are all messed up, they're not going to return money to you. They're not going to be like, oh, my bad. Here, let me give you something to make up for it, right? But yeah, that's it for today. If you have any cards that you have that are directly under some kind of light or near some window where sunlight is directly beaming down on it, you might want to reconsider where you put it and maybe place it in a different location. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this informative, and I hope this helps you when it comes to thinking about how you want to display your collection. Have a great day.